Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise, and do not be afraid. And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. When they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise, and do not be afraid. And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead.
The 3 tents were basically like shrines. Is that the intent, or what was it?
Just a way to have a permanent staying place. Live in the moment.
Live at home. Any idea why there were 3 disciples that he took up and not more?
Most of these special times, it's those 3, Peter, James, and John. And Andrew gets left out.
Peter's the one that's doing the talking again. And this time he got gently put down.
He just never quite gets it.
Well, as Father Paul said this morning, some of the disciples were a little dense. I think they just needed a little clarification there. A little direction, as we all do.
I just think how it must have been just, just,
Yeah.
I mean, and do not be afraid. I think it's fine.
Yeah. So this was the tie-in, the transition from the Mosaic law and the prophets to Jesus. That was kind of the intent of it. This particular episode.
We look at the transfigured appearance to be like the resurrected appearance, and that's why at the end he says, "Don't say anything about this till after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And then hopefully
Well, did they,
Rockhead Peter and Jimmy and Johnny, the Mama's boys, could make the connection.
did they, I mean, the Son of Man was that was a phrase that was used in the Old Testament. Right?
Yeah, if you read, well, in fact, if you're hearing a passage from the Old Testament and you hear repeatedly Son of Man coming from Ezekiel.
Yeah. So then, and Ezekiel was one of the prophets that was showing that, right? So,
No, Elijah.
Elijah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so did the disciples perceive that Jesus was quote unquote the Son of Man at that point?
Yeah, because this comes after Jesus questions the disciples that who do you say that I am?
Okay.
Peter says, you are Messiah, chosen one of God.
So then it made it very personal, that statement.
Let's look at story of Abraham and Sarah. First of the Pilgrim people that we will study. And in the first section there, right there on page 13 and on page 14, the promise is about far more than a place. It is about more than a single nation of people of whom they will be the direct ancestors. It is ultimately about a promise that will embrace all the peoples of the earth. And then on the next page, all who will eventually call upon the one God as God and trace their own call to become pilgrims in faith to Abram's call. So that's why it's so critical, as it talks a little bit later in here about that the Jews trace their story back to Abraham through Isaac. Christians also trace their heritage back to Abraham through Jesus and Isaac. And the Muslims trace their heritage back to Abraham through Ishmael. So it's all of those who believe in the one God, and Abraham was one of the first ones that we really hear about that proclaimed one God. Before that, there was all the pagan gods that people kind of held on to. So multiple gods, God for rain, the God for fertility, God for war, God for every possible need that people had. But here it's that promise that all those who believe in the one true God, from Abraham on down to us, all part of that same promise. It's not just a promise of a promised land, but people that would be united. Then as they begin their journey to Canaan, we have two different stories in here that are quite identical, and it references a third story that is also similar. And that's what we get there on page 15, where in verse 13 of chapter 12, please say therefore that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me on your account, and my life may be spared for your sake. And then after Pharaoh takes her and finds out that Sarah really is Abraham's wife, verse 17, but the Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with severe plagues because of Abram's wife, Sarai. So here we have Abraham, or Abram, as he's still called, coming into Egypt. And because of the beauty of his wife, he's afraid that, oh, they're gonna kill me so that somebody can take her as his wife, because that time women could only have one husband, but men could have numerous wives. So Abram, in fear of his own life, okay, just stay here, my sister, and you'll see what happens. And it doesn't go well for Pharaoh once he takes Sarai, and eventually he says, why'd you do this to me? Here, take all these things and get out of here. Giving him plenty of provisions and everything else. Whereas he says, take her and be gone. So let's look at those other two passages, which is basically the exact same story, but slightly different circumstances. And the first of those is in also in Genesis. And this is chapter 20 and verses 1 to 18.
Twenty-one 18.
21 to 18.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, one day.
21.
Yep.
From there, Abraham journeyed on to the region of the Negev, where he settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he resided in Gerar as an alien, Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she is my sister. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, you are about to die because of the woman you have taken, for she has a husband. Abimelech, who had not approached her, said, O Lord, would you kill an innocent man? Was he not the one who told me she is my sister? She herself also stated, he is my brother. I acted with pure heart and with clean hands. God answered him in his dream, yes, I know you did it with a pure heart. In fact, it was I who kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. So now, return the man's wife so that he may intercede for you, since he is a prophet, that you may live. If you do not return her, you can be sure that you and all who are yours will die. Early the next morning, Abimelech called all his servants and informed them of everything that had happened, and the men were filled with fear. And Abimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? What wrong did I do to you that you would have brought such great guilt on me and my kingdom? You have treated me in an intolerable way. What did you have in mind? Abimelech asked him, that you would do such a thing. Abraham answered, I thought there would be no fear of God in this place, so they would kill me on account of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, but only my father's daughter, not my mother's. And so she became my wife. When God sent me wandering from my father's house, I asked her, would you do me this favor? In whatever place we come to, say, he is my brother. And Abimelech took flocks and herds and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he restored his wife Sarah to him. Then Abimelech said to him, Here my land is at your disposal. Settle wherever you please. To Sarah he said, I hereby give your brother 1,000 shekels of silver, This will preserve your honor before all who are with you and will exonerate you before everyone. Abraham then interceded with God, and God restored health to Abimelech, to his wife, and his maidservants, so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed every womb in Abimelech household on account of Abraham's wife Sarah.
So different location, different person, Pharaoh and the story in Egypt and Abimelech here, but basically the exact same story. And then we get story told again in chapter 26. This time it's Abimelech reappears, but it's Abraham's nephew Lot. So chapter 26, verses 6 to 11.
So Isaac settled in fear when the men of the place asked questions about his wife.
Isaac, not Lot, yeah.
Huh?
It's Isaac, not Lot, yeah. Yeah, no, you're in the right place. I just said the
Okay.
wrong name.
It is, okay, so it's Isaac.
Yeah.
Okay, so Isaac settled in fear when the men of the place asked questions about his wife. He answered, "She is my sister." He was afraid if he called her his wife, the men of the place would kill him on account of Rebekah, since she was very beautiful. But when he had been there for a long time, Amalek, king of the Philistines, happened to look out of a window and was surprised to see Isaac fondling his wife Rebekah. So he called for Isaac and said, "She must certainly be your wife. How could you have said she is my sister?" Isaac replied, "I thought I might lose my life on her account." "How could you do this to us?" exclaimed Amalek. "It would have taken very little for one of the men to lie with your wife, and you would have thus brought guilt upon us." Amalek therefore gave this warning to all his men: "Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall forthwith be put to death."
So here we have basically the same plot. 3 different versions of it in Genesis. Amalek is the ruler in second and third story, and Abraham and Sarah, the people in the first 2 stories, and Isaac and Rebekah in the third one. But again, the same story. So what do you make of that, having a story repeated 3 times here in Genesis with similar characters in some and different characters in others?
Somebody was trying to make a point. I'm not, the one thing that I find a little unusual about the story is that every time that this happened, the guy who created the issue walks away with a pocket full of change. More than a pocket full of change. So I mean, it worked, it seemed to work out well. He was rewarded for it. I don't know, it sounds like a cautionary tale.
And it's like you can pay off your wrongs.
Yeah, well, on the other hand, the other side of it is, when he did that, he put other people in jeopardy, and those people didn't know. But when they found out, they were unhappy and tried to make restitution for their potential sins. And it sounds like they were more godly than he was in that scenario.
But they could have killed him and that would have been okay. You know,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
desperate measures, but it worked out well. I think I'm missing something. Linda, what do you think?
I'm thinking that, I mean, it looks to me like it's in his descendants, or, I mean, it's Abraham, but also involving his descendants.
Mhm.
I mean, you have Isaac. That is written Isaac and Rebekah. And then Isaac is involved with Abimelech. So, I mean, the stories are the same. Uh-oh, I'm getting feedback.
No, I'm having some issues with my computer. It just kind of goes blank every
Oh.
once. I'm not sure what's going on with it, but
So I'm not, I mean, it's all how it's told by the author. They're telling the same way, the same story, but with different people involved.
Was it common that folks would steal somebody else's wife?
well, David did it.
No, it's true too. Well, wasn't he a descendant of Abraham? The acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. I think.
Yeah, so. There, it's a family tradition.
Oh. So
Well,
it
they
doesn't-
all definitely involve God's intervention.
Mhm.
Then moving into Abram's faith, in chapter 15, at verse 6 there, Abram put his faith in the Lord, who credited it to him as an act of righteousness. And then it speaks of righteousness over in the middle part of that second column on that page. If you ask St. Paul, this is the most important act of faith in biblical history prior to the act of faith that prompts the cry, "He is risen." Abram, who is waiting for God to bring about the promise of an heir to the land that is also as yet only a promise, believes God will bring it about and is declared righteous for his faith. Paul carefully examines the circumstances under which Abram makes his act of faith and notes that Abram was declared righteous while as yet uncircumcised. Because of that simple fact, Paul proclaims we can be certain that God accepts uncircumcised Gentiles when they too profess faith. Circumcision is not the way for a Gentile to be declared righteous. That happens when we believe God has raised Jesus Christ from the dead. So let's look at that passage that references here in Romans. So chapter 4 and verses 1 to 13.
You said Romans chapter 4.
Yep. 1 to 13.
Okay. What then shall we say of Abraham, our ancestor, according to the flesh? Certainly, if Abraham was justified by his deeds, he has grounds for boasting, but not in God's view. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as justice. Now, when a man works, his wages are not regarded as a favor, but as his due. But when a man does nothing, yet believes in him who justifies the sinful, his faith is credited as justice. Thus, David congratulates the man to whom God credits justice without requiring deeds. Blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven, whose sins are covered over. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord imputes no guilt. Does this blessedness apply only to the circumcised or to the uncircumcised as well? For we say that Abraham's faith was credited as justice. What were the circumstances in which it was credited? Was it after he was circumcised or before? It was before. In fact, he received the sign of circumcision as a seal attesting to the justice received through faith while he was still uncircumcised. Thus, he was to be the father of all the uncircumcised who believed, so that for them too, faith might be credited as justice, as well as the father of those circumcised who are not merely so, but who follow the path of faith, which Abraham walked while still uncircumcised. Include 13?
Yes.
Okay. Certainly the promise made to Abraham and his descendants that they would inherit the world did not depend on the law. It was made in view of the justice that comes from faith.
Okay.
There they bring in faith.
So that was the big dispute, as Paul began to preach the good news to the Gentiles. Those who had been Jewish and became Christian felt that, well, you need to be circumcised if you're going to join us. And this was one of Paul's justifications, and he's got other references to it in other writings of his. That circumcision was a act that came about after Abraham was declared righteous. And therefore, it was his faith that made him righteous, not the circumcision. And Gentiles who came to faith in Jesus as our salvation did not need to be circumcised in order to become Christian. So Romans really is Paul's theological dissertation. So he take everything he wrote in his other writings, which were primarily addressing specific issues or specific locations. This kind of pulls everything together in what his beliefs and teachings really were all about. So that's why I said that you can see that same thing about circumcision not being necessary in some of Paul's other writings, but really is summarized here in this passage from Romans. Then on page 18, it kind of picks up on that theme. Second full paragraph there, the first column. The pilgrimage of Christian faith is one that extends even beyond this life, embracing in faith the hope of the resurrection. Having this faith teaches us to see everything in this life differently. Because of this faith, we have become lifelong pilgrims. Without it, we could only see what is in front of our eyes, and our journey would more likely be toward something rather than toward someone. So one of the things we're going to see throughout these 4 lessons is references like this, where it's taking something from these different pilgrim stories and how does that apply? How does that fit into our own faith? So what do you make of that paragraph there?
I think it points you toward a longer view. You know, it's. You know, I'm not going to New York to look at the Niagara Falls, so, you know, I'm taking the path to get to something beyond that's physical. You know, I don't want to get closer to a place, so I want to get closer to God. That's where I want to go. Come with me. He's dragging me along, just so you know.
Before something. Rather than.
How, you know, as Christians, how can we live our life as planned if we didn't have faith in God? And I mean, like, you know, you have atheists who have no, you know, they don't believe in God. How can they have any faith in any? And I could see why they say here it's towards something rather than someone. Well, if you didn't have faith in God, there would be no, it would definitely be in something rather than someone, like an idol, for instance. Yes, no? You know, like somebody who idolizes, like you know, feedback.
You were cutting out there, so we didn't catch the last part of what you had said.
Oh, well, that's not good. Where was I when?
Idolizing something.
Yeah, it's I mean, you know, it's like when before the Great Flood, when people were idolizing, you know, they made these gold, the gold calf and all, and they idolized the object rather than God, because they had no faith in God. And some had no belief in God. So where, I mean, faith then is if you believe in God, that's where you're believing in someone instead of the something. Is that what this paragraph is all about?
Yeah, it's all about faith.
I mean, that's how our Christian, how can we live our life in what God, I mean, God has plans for everybody, right?
Yep.
And we live that life according to our faith in God, practicing our faith in God. In our devotion, be another way of putting.
Then we move into chapter 16. And again, at the time of Abraham, there was not really a belief in a life after death. So everything happened in this life. So you were rewarded if you were good, you were punished if you were sinful in this life, and if you were looked on favorably by God, you would have land, you'd have possessions, you'd have sons, so your name was carried on, and that's how you'd be remembered through your name from your son. So here we got Abram and Sarah apparently not able to bear children, so they have no children. And Abram's heritage is not going to live on.
So finally, Sarai says, you need to have a son, so take my servant and see if she can bring forth a son for you. Then when Hagar finds out that she is pregnant, she kind of makes it sound almost like she's rubbing it into Sarah. And then Sarah gets upset at her and sends her away. So what do you make of this story?
That evil thing, that green evil thing called jealousy.
Mhm.
I mean, isn't it their custom or in their culture, if you will, to, if the wife cannot bear a child, then they can have one of their handmaidens or whoever be their concubines, their husband's concubines, in order to carry the name on.
Mhm. Yep.
But in this case, Hagar becomes, Sarai actually, she becomes, I think there's jealousy because she even abuses Hagar.
A little bit of excess pride on Hagar's part.
Yeah, like, like we all do. I'm pregnant with this son or whatever, and you can't, haha.
Yeah.
I mean, we all do it, and even to this day, everybody.
Wait a minute, I didn't have a
Only
concubine.
Sarai strikes back.
Well, my grandpa's had combines, but they didn't have concubines.
My dad.
Yeah.
Concubines, not combines. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so that's what my grandpa's had, was combines, not concubines.
Yeah, all right. Well, culture has changed a bit.
Yeah. But even the combines, they were slow getting that. Both my grandpas were one of the last ones to give up threshing.
I have pictures of her father threshing with horses.
Yeah, the threshing crews.
Yeah. He was
My
on
mom always told stories of how they'd have to cook for him.
Yep,
it. Yeah.
those are some pretty good meals.
So this story just seems odd to me. But it sort of tells the story of how we ended up with two branches. I'm curious why the Muslims are focused on Ishmael. Is it just the tribes or?
No, because remember Hagar and Ishmael were sent off. So where they settled, that's where Islam basically began.
Okay.
And the Muslims do believe in the same God we do, just like the Jews do, but neither of them believe in a Trinitarian God. That's unique to Christians. But the one true God that we believe in is the same God. So like in Islam, when they speak of Allah, that's their word for the same God that we call God. Under references to Yahweh or whatever, but it's one and the same God. All three of those denominations follow. Then let's see. That passage at the bottom of page 19 and then on to page 20, where it's
talking about the change in name from Abram to Abraham and from Sarai to Sarah. And on the bottom of that first column, where it talks a little bit about naming, answering God's call and responding in faith has given the couple a new identity before God. It is not the meaning of their names. It is not that the meaning of their names have significantly changed. They haven't. But any change in name marks some change in identity. This change in identity is because they have been brought into a new special covenanted relationship with God. So what are some things in our life where you see a change in name?
In marriage,
Confirmation,
confirmation, yeah.
get the name.
When I was confirmed, but it wasn't in the Catholic Church. There was no name change. But I was already named after my godfather at that point too, so I don't know that made a difference.
Well, in confirmation, you get an additional, you don't change. You know,
So in confirmation, if you take a confirmation name, what's the significance of the name that you take?
I don't know.
I have no idea.
It's been a long time since I went.
I missed that part of my Catholic education.
I did.
Is that a confirmation name supposed to be like a name, saint's name? I remember. And it's about, and incorporate your part of your sponsors. Satan name and Satan, saintly name. Sorry, I had too much coffee. No. But I mean, I mean, that's the only thing I can remember too. It's been a long time for me too.
Enlighten us, please.
Yes,
A
I
saint
need
that
feedback.
kind of has meaning to you.
That's exactly what it is you pick a name that you can kind of use as a role model. So there's something significant about that saint that you see in your own life. Now, what the confirmation ritual actually encourages is that you not take a new name, that you be confirmed in your baptismal name, because confirmation is really sealing baptism. But some bishops still encourage taking a new name, and what they are supposed to be doing is they write a letter to the bishop prior to their confirmation, requesting that they be confirmed. And what the bishop here is asking is that you elaborate on the saint's name that you picked for a confirmation name, and what is the significance of that. You go up to St. John's, to the Benedictine monastery there, when a monk makes his profession, he takes a new name. And again, it's where they're supposed to pick the name of somebody that they can kind of emulate and follow as a role model. So the religious professed for sisters used to do the same thing. And then after the Second Vatican Council, when it's like, okay, you don't longer need to wear these gowns and veils, and you don't need to take a new name. A lot of them went back to what their original given name was, and some still kept the name that they took when they made their religious profession, but all of those are a change in identity. So it's confirmation is supposed to mean something as far as you really professing the faith that you believe in. And that was the original idea of taking a confirmation name. It's like, okay, now I've got a new identity. It really added to emphasis of when your mother was upset at you, when it became Randall Joseph John Bauer, get in here right away. And she used my baptismal middle name of Joseph and my confirmation name of John. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna go hide. Pretend I didn't hear her. I don't want that wrath. Yeah. But yeah, so there's the name you're given at baptism. In fact, it used to be that you had to have a saint's name, either your first name or middle name, and
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I read that.
Yeah,
so some people that, in fact, last time we were down at it's my Aunt Beth's, my Uncle Doug, who was my confirmation sponsor, was talking about his name, and the priest that was baptizing him didn't think that his first name or middle name were saint's names, so he gave him a different name, and that was on his baptismal record. And I know there were other ones that the same thing happened to, because when I had to do all the baptismal records at the somebody needed a copy of their baptismal certificate up at Callaway, and I had to go into the older books to find some of these from years ago. It was a name that was written in there by the priest because they did not have any saint's name in their legal name.
But they don't need that anymore, correct? If you don't have to have a saint's name in your
Well,
baptismal name.
What we look at is All Saints Day is all of us considered as saints, not canonized saints. But again, it's someone that we see as saintly. So we used to do at Holy Rosary on Halloween, is we had what Father Jerry called a pumpkin mass. So somebody was supposed to carve a pumpkin in the image of someone that they looked at as a saint. So whether it was an actual saint or my grandma's a saint, so carve it in the image of your grandma or whatever. But again, to emphasize that communion of saints, that it's not just those that are recognized canonically as a canonized saint, but saints of all the faithful.
My middle name is Joseph. You know, and I think about the exam, like, if I was gonna choose someone, who would I choose? Probably Saint Joseph. Somehow that worked out. Yeah, could be.
Jojo.
Well, it's better than the identity change I had when I went into boot camp in the Marines,
Yeah.
where I became maggot. And that was the nice thing that they said, the nicest thing.
So what did you do to deserve a name like that?
I enlisted. All it took.
So when we have a change in identity, and the first example that we heard was marriage, where commonly was that the woman would take on the last name of the man, and now that's not necessarily happening all the time. Sometimes they keep their maiden name, sometimes they go to the hyphenated names, which if the children then take the hyphenated name and then they marry somebody else with the hyphenated name.
That could be a long name.
Yeah. 28 names after my first name here with all these hyphens in there. And then there might be people who take on an entirely new name. Nancy's youngest brother, who was John Morey, is now John Northwood. Because when he got married, his first wife, they had a discussion as to, okay, what are we gonna do about names? And they both Boundary Waters a lot of north, so. They changed so that they all had the same name. Which had nothing to do with Maury or, I don't remember what her original name was. But the tough thing then was when he got married a second time and they were discussing what they were gonna do for names. And he kept the name Northwood, which related to his first wife was a little bit of a bitter pill for his new wife, so she kept her maiden name.
Yeah, there wasn't much of a choice back when we got married.
Yeah. Understood that that's what you would
I
do.
would have had trouble giving up Riley. I did. For Vance.
Move back further in the line when you have to line up alphabetically.
It always be at the end. I always had to.
Did we
She
lose
can
her? or
come
she-
back. There she is.
Okay, that was.
And
But it's like frozen. Oh, there she.
it started doing that and I don't know why.
You're both frozen. It's interesting. Oh, there she goes.
You're not.
That's weird.
Yep. Okay, guys.
What?
Just visit, and see what's going on. All right. Then we get into where Abraham finally gets his own son and is asked to sacrifice him. And doesn't really seem to question, like, okay. So what do you make of that story?
You know, it might have been more, I have a lot of trouble with that, but they did sacrifices back then. And we don't, so that might have had a little difference, but still.
Well, it demonstrates total faith and acceptance of God's word. It's a tough story to listen to and think about.
That should, are you able to hear me yet?
Yes,
Oh, okay. Because I've been looking at a frozen picture of
Yeah.
Deacon Randy for the last few minutes here.
yeah.
But anyway, getting back to the, what was the question now?
This, what do you make of the story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice Isaac and being willing to carry it out?
Well, naturally in this situation, God was testing Abraham to test his faithfulness. And yeah, Abraham went, actually, went ahead with it. That just, I read that over and I even read it a couple times. And it does, to actually sacrifice your own child would have to really take some faithfulness, if you will. But thankfully God stops him, and that's where he seals, if you will, as in, seals his initial promise that he will have the land and fill it with many descendants. He'll acquire land and fill it with many descendants. And that's what I get from the whole story of that. Because Abraham showed so much faith and faithfulness in God that he was willing to sacrifice his own son. He trusted in God.
Did any of you make the connection? The end of verse 12 there, you did not withhold from me your own beloved son. And in today's gospel, we heard, this is my beloved son. So what did God do that Abraham did not have to do?
He sacrificed his son.
He had to sacrifice his son. God had to sacrifice his son, whereas Abraham in the end did not have to.
Yeah, the one was, Abraham was going to sacrifice his son for himself because he was asked. And Jesus was sacrificed for humanity. Still a tough concept to deal with.
Yeah.
Was it Abraham? Did he actually, did he have the selfish in that sense that it was for himself and not for God?
I don't know. He was told to do it, or so he was just doing it. Yeah, I don't know what his rationale was. Obviously he had faith and he listened.
Feedback, please.
So he really was showing his faithfulness to God. God had made a promise to him, and finally he has a son that can maybe help fulfill that promise, and then he's asked to, okay, sacrifice that son. And when he had put his trust in God that this promise you're making is still going to happen, I'm not sure how, but I'm willing to do what you ask of me. And then we get interesting thing here in right after God has Abraham stop and provides another animal for sacrifice. In verse 17, I will bless you abundantly and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. We talked about the disciples sometimes needing to have things over and over before they finally understood. Let's look at how many different times God made this same promise. So we go back to chapter 12, verse 2. I will make of you a great nation. And then in chapter 13, verse 16, I will make your descendants like the dust of the earth. If anyone could count the dust of the earth, your descendants too might be counted. And then in chapter 15, verse 5, look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. Just so, he added, shall your descendants be. So we have the same promise being made numerous times, and then again here in chapter 17, verse 2, between you and me, I will establish my covenant. I will multiply you exceedingly. So the same promise of descendants, though numerous they can't be counted, made several times in this journey of Abraham.
Yeah, he made the promise over and over, but then he said. So. Yeah. You know,
Mhm.
Well, he waited a long time for that son, you know. And it was kind of a miracle when it happened. If you get rid of this one, it's still got the promise. Not sure how it's gonna happen, but
Well, maybe next time we'll have twins.
yeah. Still had Ishmael.
Well, let's look at some of the questions. Question 2B, without defending Abraham's actions, can you imagine circumstances where people might do, this is in reference to, here's my sister. Can you imagine circumstances where people might do desperate things if they feel threatened and isolated in new surroundings? How does this perspective affect your understanding of the text?
like looking for a loophole, because. She was his wife, but she was his sister. And it's like.
It's only part of the truth.
People do that.
People are so they want to protect their family, that protection is so strong that yeah, and they're going to defend themselves if somebody threatens them. I mean, if somebody like approached me to, and threatened to, for instance, kill one of my kids or whatever, I would do something in defense.
And then question 5, where it's this promise of descendants, but no son for Abraham, and get the story of Hagar then bearing a son, and then Sarah's reaction. So the second part of that question B, can you think of times in your life when you grew impatient for God's plan to unfold and tried to take matters into your own hands? What lessons did you learn through those experiences?
I have trouble with that question.
I
Because
did too.
unlike Abraham or Abram, whoever, I haven't heard God come to me and say, this is a promise, this is, I mean. The only thing I can think of is, at some point in time, I didn't know whether or not I believed in God. And something happened, and it became very clear to me that I did. And I've never lost that piece of faith since. So, but I was 21 at the time. Took me a long time to come to that conclusion. But in general, I don't know if I'm pushing things or not pushing things. Am I getting it done on time? Am I not? I just try to have faith that what is happening is puts me on a good path. That's my pilgrimage. I don't know. That would make me think. How would you know if you're out of-
When I'm trying to think if that would relate, like when I was graduating from high school, And before that already, I was thinking of going into the military. And my parents objected because they were so worried that, I'd get homesick and, they would pay for my nursing. I always wanted to be a nurse and all this and that. So I tried to do everything on my own, but fortunately, they had to sign for me to go in because I was only 17 at the time. So I'm glad I just had that chance to wait because, it gave me more time to think about. That's a big decision. I'm glad it happened the way it happened because I was able to follow through with what I wanted to do. But my parents still really didn't like it because they were afraid I'd be homesick because I was always, I never was able to be social when I was growing up because I had to help on the farm. I was the milkmaiden, if you will, good description. I had to milk the cows all the time.
Yeah, that dairy farms really put a damper on being involved in other activities because the cows took priority.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. I can't see you guys' face, but I'm getting an idea. But that's it. Yeah,
I can't get the camera to work right, so.
that's
Something-
okay.
Okay.
But I'm just glad though that there had to have been some sort of an intervention there, and it could have turned out to be a disastrous decision on my part if there wasn't my parents intervening
Mhm.
a lot of the times, to make me really think about that decision. So anyway. But I have a habit of doing it now, even as a old married lady. If I'm going to, if I want to do something or if I want to get something, I do it sometimes because I'm kind of selfish in that way. Sometimes, if it's going to help me do things a little easier, make life a little easier, because I have to do everything here at home by myself while my hubby works. So yeah, it leads to confrontation sometimes, but so those are just lessons that you just have to learn through life, even as you get older.
And question 9, what lessons for your own life can you draw from the story of God's testing of Abraham?
You had to pick all the hard questions, didn't you?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, all the ones where it pouts.
Um, I think the reality of the situation is, our life is, it's not all easy. And there's a lot of tests. There's a lot of things that can get in your way of your faith. I used to pray for strength. Now I pray for faith. It's been very, today during that funeral, I was very much aware of that.
Mhm. Situations like this, yeah, Linda, I don't know if you know, we had a funeral today for a
stillborn baby and the mother who died.
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah.
So that's a real challenge to people's faith, and that's where. In fact, I told one of the family members, because the husband is just very angry, and I said, yeah, it's natural to be angry at God. There's no explanation. And that's where faith can help you through it, or you can just turn your back on faith, and it's like, how can I believe in a God that would let something like this happen? So those are real turning points for people in their lives. Some of them might be drawn closer to their faith because of the situation, and other ones they continue to drive them away.
Well.
You know, I had whoop, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go
Um,
ahead.
you know, I had kind of a personal thing happen, you know, when you talk about just things that kind of drive you away. I had a time when both of my kids were young. I mean, you know, like 3-4 years old. And I was home by myself with them because my late husband was in the military. I mean, he hadn't retired from the military yet. So I went ahead and, because I was off of active duty and already in the reserves. And so anyway, I would every Sunday, you know, dress the kids up and go to church. And anyway, this particular, and I believe it, I'm trying to think, I always keep thinking it was for Easter Sunday, but I can't remember specifically, but I had to stand in the back with the kid, you know, with the kids in the back. I had to stand in the back of the church because it was so full. So more than likely, I guess it was Easter. And anyway, my oldest one got away from me and he ran all the way up to the altar and then ran around the church. And I had one of the ladies there, when I got him back, she brought him back. She literally chewed me out for how could I allow my son to run up to the altar and, you know, and, you know, that turned me off so much. It hurt me so bad that happened, that for one thing, I cried all the way home. And, you know, I never went back to that church again because that just hurt me so much.
Yeah, some people are pretty insensitive and like, you know, this is the way I see things, and if somebody doesn't see it the same way I do, they've got some problems.
Yeah.
The student who does that is the one that has the problems.
That's like, you know, a lot of people, there's been a thing back and forth on crying, and it's like, I used to sit in the crying room some with the kids, and it's like, you couldn't hear, you couldn't, you know, I love it that, you know, Father always says, we don't mind noise, you know, that's.
One of the books that I read when we were out east, making intentional disciples was the title of the book, but it was talking about the importance of starting to work on faith with young children. And the author was giving examples of different churches that she's worked with across the country. And she talked about this one priest who really emphasizes, like what Father Paul does. In fact, I read that passage to him. It's like, we have a crying room with a tabernacle is what he refers to as his church.
That's good.
I like it.
I think it's wonderful to hear the young ones.
Missed that during the pandemic.
Yeah,
Well,
that's one thing I like about St. Catherine is they get the children involved so much. I just love seeing that.
Yeah, the kids that go out for that children's liturgy just really get into it. And it's interesting, some of the stories we hear from the catechists that are leading that program.
Oh,
Things that the kids come up with and how they really participate.
You know, I wish I wish our church would have had that when I was a kid growing up. Because I'm sure I would have had a greater understanding then of, I just almost feel like I was isolated, you know, like now with Bible study, I'm getting a whole different understanding and in some cases it's kind of hard to understand what's going on. There was a lot of stuff that was not told to us
Mhm.
when I was growing up. You know, when you talk about the confirmation names and all, either I was too young to understand or they never really explained things to us. You know, well, as to, well, you really should have a name like this or that or whatever. I mean, you know, I don't recall any of that happening. What was it because there were so many of us? I don't know. I have no idea. But anyway, that's kind of what my thoughts are when I was growing up. I wish we would have been more involved.
I like that it's not in Latin any longer. And I know there's a push now sometimes to have it go back to that, but I like being able to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
what, you know, you're much more involved.
I get so much more out of Mass now since I've been going through Bible study.
Good.
I may not talk a whole lot, you know, but
You're not talking too much. We
say
appreciate
what?
it. You are not talking too much. We appreciate
Oh.
you.
Well, that's good. I like that. But I do need a lot of feedback because I'm here all by myself and talking to this computer.
Yeah.
Is there anything in this lesson that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about or?
You know, on
questions?
question 8, I've
Mhm.
got a question on that where he says, let me see, I've got it on my computer here. Darn it, and it went out. You know, when you talk about Genesis 18, reveal about the nature of God in relationship with those who are his friends. I'm sorry, but I didn't quite understand the question. I suppose it would have been best to go to the Bible instead, and since we don't have our books with us.
Um,
I mean, the visit, I mean, what I get about, you know, God visit, he has the 3 men, they come to the tent where Abraham and Sarah are.
mhm.
Am I going so far with that? But anyway, and his relationship for those who are his friends. Are you talking about Abraham's friends or God's friends?
God's friends.
Okay. But God has a whole world full of friends and everybody,
Yeah.
alive and through death. feedback, please.
Everybody can be a friend of God.
Yeah,
It's just like our human friendship. Somebody may want to be our friend, but we're not ready to be their friend, or we don't want to be their friend, or our other friends say, well, don't be friend with that person.
Right.
So where God wants to be our friend, but we have to make a conscious decision whether we want to be God's friend.
Okay, so I'm making it too complicated. Because really, yeah. But you know, if you get, you know, like a real test, you know, like you gave the example of this funeral this morning. If there was a friendship established already with God, how that's going to take a lot to build that back.
Mhm.
Friendship and trust.
Yep.
There's going to be a lot of healing in there with that. Were there others involved besides the husband? Siblings? Or was this to be their first child?
Yeah, no, as far as their children, yeah, that was their first one.
Oh dear. Wow. Yeah. That husband's gonna have a lot of healing to do.
Yeah.
It's gonna take more than a year.
And the other tragic part is his mother had just died 2 weeks before that.
Oh no. Oh my gosh. Okay, let me ask you this. You know, kind of along that line. How do you feel, or what is your, this is off of the kind of a political kind, but what is your opinion on with all these families that are losing loved ones due to the fentanyl death, the fentanyl use and all? Do you think they feel the same way in their relationship with God?
I don't know that that's any different than other things that have happened in the past. I mean, like there used to be a lot of diseases that would claim children at young ages, that now we've got vaccines, immunizations to protect against those. But there's been the decisions that people have been making to abuse or misuse alcohol or drugs.
Yeah,
For a long time, so the culprit of what the drug is might change, but the situation is the same that it's been for centuries. But there's things out there that people can get hooked on that take them the wrong way, and
yeah. Well,
yeah.
the reason I ask is, you know, when we started talking about God's plan, God testing people, etc. Because when I saw on the news and this mother that said she lost 2 of her sons to that.
Mhm.
You know, on the news during the hearing of the House Committee on that, you know, they're trying to get people to testify and all. And she said she lost 2 sons. I tell you, if I lost both of my sons, I don't know what in the world I would do. But what about those that, you know, would lose their sons to war or something, you know? That would be just as, I mean, you really would have to have faith in God in order to get through with that. I mean, really strong faith.
Yeah, losing a child is one of the real toughest things that parents can deal with.
Yep.
In fact, there's a high frequency of divorce after
Yeah.
a couple loses
Yep.
a child. 'Cause,
Yeah.
typically the two, they can grow closer together, but a lot of times they're dealing with it in a different way and they just grow further apart.
Yep. Well, anyway, okay. Thank you for that.
So next week is our engaging our faith session on Tree of Life, so it's kind of a Lenten service of some sort. Just to help deepen us in our Lenten journey. And I think the plan is to either live stream it or record it. So then you can just check to see if that's
Okay.
view it later if you would like to. So then 2 weeks from today is lesson 2, which is the exile, I mean, not the exile, the Exodus and entry. So kind of the journey of the people with Moses. And then finally getting into the promised land that we heard about in today's lesson. So let's close with the Lord's Prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our
Amen.
Father, who art
Who
in
art
heaven,
in heaven,
hallowed
hallowed
be
be thy name,
thy
thy
kingdom come,
kingdom come,
thy will
thy
be
will
done
be done
on
on
earth.
earth as it is in heaven.
Give
Give
us this
us
day our
our
daily,
daily bread.
forgive us
Forgive
our
us
trespasses,
trespasses,
as we
as
forgive
we forgive those who trespass against us. And
lead
lead
us
us not
into
into temptation, but
but
deliver
deliver
us
from
from
evil.
evil. Amen.
Thank you all and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye,
You
Linda.
too. Bye. I can't
Bye.
see. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yep, bye-bye.